Okay, good morning. So basically, today is the September 8th, and I will continue reading from where I left off last time. Love will hide a multitude of sins. Kierkegaard, okay? Upbuilding Discourses. It is an unworthy conception of God to think that love hides a multitude of sins in this way. In our deliberating and speaking, do we perhaps forget that God is in heaven is not halted by any deception, that his thought is vivid and present, that is, it penetrates everything and judges the counsels of the heart? Would someone be right in reminding us to stick to the truth when we praise love and say that it is beautiful and lovely of love? To be so eager to hide a multitude of sins and avert wrath rather than to exaggerate grossly by saying that love hides a multitude of sins? Has not the person who speaks this way forgotten that we do not forget that love prays for the sins of others? Has he not forgotten that the prayer of a righteous person avails much? When Abraham spoke urgently to the Lord and pleaded for Sodom and Gomorrah, was he not covering a multitude of sins? Or is it perhaps commendable perspicacity on someone's part to say that his pleading was just as much a reconciliation of the multitude of sins and hastened the judgment, just as his own life was already a judgment, which, if capable of constituting a condition, would inevitably make the judgment even more terrible? How did Abraham pray? Let us speak of it in human terms. Did he not, as it were, sweep the Lord along in this line of thinking? Did he not bring the Lord to forget the multitude of sinners in order to count the numbers of the righteousness, if there were 50 righteous, 45, 40, 30, 20, yes, even only 10 guiltless persons? Would they have covered the multitude of sins that were happening in Sodom and Gomorrah? Okay, if you're a gay or something, excuse me, but if you see the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, you will notice that this gay thing hasn't been discovered recently. It was in vogue in those times, which was the times before Jesus. They were still gays in that time, and see what happened. But anyway, today we're more tolerant, and we don't want anyone to die like that. We want everyone to convert, not to die in sin. See, love covers a multitude of sins. Does the destruction of the cities prove the opposite, or does it prove anything other than that there were not even 10 guiltless persons in Sodom? And yet, what was Abraham himself compared with an apostle? What was the bold confidence compared with an apostles? How great at الدرما فوق الكمبيوتر prosit سليلهم الناس. How great in a human being that his life, if it is righteousness, will judge even angels. More blessed is the love that hides a multitude of sins. We have praised the power of love to hide a multitude of sins. Pa. Iva, ciao. We have praised the power of love to hide a multitude of sins. We have spoken as to those who are perfect. If there is someone who does not feel himself to be perfect, the discourse would make no distinction. Let us dwell once again on this love in order to observe the image of it that clearly presents itself to the soul. If anyone by observing himself in the mirror became convicted of his unlikeness, if anyone felt this way, the discourse would make no distinction. When the scribes and the Pharisees had seized a woman in open sin, they placed her in the middle of the temple, face to face with the Savior. Look how beautiful. But Jesus stooped down and wrote with his finger on the ground. He who knew all things surely knew also what the Pharisees and the scribes knew before they told him. The scribes and the Pharisees quickly discovered her guilt. It was indeed easy, since her sin was open. They also discovered another sin, one of which they made themselves guilty, as they laid snares for the Lord. But Jesus stooped down and wrote with his finger on the ground. Why do you suppose that he stooped down? Why do you suppose did he write with his finger on the ground? Did he sit there like a judge, attending carefully to the prosecutor's speech, listening and stooping down to note the complaint so as not to forget it, so as to judge scrupulously? Was this woman's guilt the only thing the Lord put in writing? Or is he who is writing with his finger on the ground instead writing in order to erase and forget? There the sinner stood, surrounded by those who were perhaps even more guilty, who loudly accused her, but have stooped down and did not hear the accusation, which vanished into thin air. It wrote, with its fingers in order to erase what it itself knew, because the sin discovers a multitude of sin. Where there is sin, see, if I'm arrogant, I can, like the political system in Malta, see, PN, PL. PN are bad, and they accuse the PL of being bad, which in turn takes PN being, and this, it's like a never-ending cycle. But when you love someone, it's the opposite. You don't insult, you don't curse, you don't shout, you don't accuse. See? Yet even before the eyes of sin, love hides a multitude of sin, because with one word from the Lord, the Pharisees and the scribes were silenced, and there was no accuser anymore. There was no one who condemned her. But Jesus said to her, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more, for the punishment of sin breeds new sin. But love hides a multitude of sin, taken from the Bible directly. Epistle of Peter, chapter 4, first epistle of Peter. And he continues, love will hide a multitude of sins. Chapter 2, Kierkegaard, discourse number Kierkegaard. It's dedicated to his father, Michael Pedersen Kierkegaard. My father. These discourses are dedicated to you, Kierkegaard. And the preface, I will read the preface of this book right now. Although this little book, which is called Discourses, not Sermons, because its author does not, no, it's not by Kierkegaard, it's by the translator, this, nothing. So this book, dedicated to his father, Kierkegaard is contemplating upon love covers a multitude of sins. He must have thought of his father in a loving manner, see? Perhaps he was thinking about his father's defects and his father's judgment. But then again, he found refuge in this verse that love is much stronger than anything else, you see? And he dedicated this chapter to his father, chapter 1, chapter 2. Just as apostolic speech is essentially different in content from all human speech, so it is also in many ways different in form. For example, in order to draw an individual forward, it does not halt the listener and invite him to rest. It does not halt the speaker and allow that he himself forget to work. Apostolic speech is concerned, ardent, burning, inflamed, everywhere and always stirred by the forces of the new life, calling, shouting, beckoning, explosive in its outbursts, brief, disjointed, harrowing, itself violently shaken as much by fear and trembling as by longing and blessed expectancy. Everywhere witnessing to the powerful unrest of the spirit and the profound impatience of the heart. How could anyone have time for a long speech when he himself is running? then he himself would have to stand still. How could anyone have time for prolix pondering when he is trying to be all things to all people? Then he would be unable to change the weapons of the Spirit fast enough. How could anyone have much time for human miniature when he is heading under the full sail of hope towards the perfect? But if apostolic speech is always as impatient as that of a woman in labor, then two considerations in particular are likely to stir it up even more. On the one hand, the idea that the night is over and day has broken, that the night has lasted long enough and the point is to use the day. On the other hand, the idea that the time is coming when one can no longer work, that the days are numbered, the end is near, that the end of all things is approaching. The text just read also witnesses to his apostolic ardor and begins with a therefore, to which the immediately preceding words in the apostle's letter later correspond. But the end of all things is at hand. Words that explain not only his therefore, but also something in the text that perhaps, humanly speaking, could require an explanation, which also demonstrates how very different apostolic impatience is from the rashness of an excited person. Does it not seem odd that right after the beautiful admonition, above all, have a heartfelt love for one another, right after the significant words of comfort joined to that, love will hide a multitude of sins, comes such a seemingly casual admonition as this, gladly lend your house to one another without grumbling. And yet this admonition illustrates precisely apostolic authority and wisdom. Indeed, what excited person, after having said, the end of all things is at hand, would have added an admonition like that? Does it not go without saying that it would be superfluous? Would he not, if possible, by his speech, bring about the evacuation of the houses so that there would be scarcely anyone who would want to borrow a house? And if there was such a one, he would not need to be in a predicament. But an apostle is not impatient in this way, and his restlessness is superior to any human love-headedness. The apostle loves his congregation too much to suppress spinelessly the shocking news that the end of all things is near, but on the other hand, he knows how to call the congregation promptly to order again, as if the shock was forgotten, as if there were peace and security, a desirable opportunity to demonstrate its love to the neighbor even in life's unimportant circumstances. Therefore the words, the end of all things is near, are not an arid storm, cloud that passes over and throws everything into disorder, but an anxiety that clears the air and makes everyone gentler and more deeply inward, more loving and swifter to buy the opportune time, but also strong enough not to be exhausted by the thought that the hour of opportunity is past. The apostle who is speaking is not drunk on dreams, but sober in his thinking and in his speech. But the end of all things is near. These are shocking words even in the mouth of a rash and reckless person, to say nothing of an apostle's. For this very reason Peter adds words of comfort, strong enough to overcome anxiety. Love will hide a multitude of sins, or are they perhaps not needed? Is everything past with the end of all things? Is any other cover needed than the one granted to everyone? The righteous and the unrighteous? Is not the person lying in the bosom of the earth covered with and well put away? Would there be someone who did not understand the apostle because he did not expressly state the day when there will be a question about such a love? Or have the words of terror and also the words of comfort lost their meaning, inasmuch as the end of all things did not come as he had predicted? Is an apostle an ineffectual man to whom it is important only to predict the end of all things in general, but without any bearing on himself and others expect insofar as it could satisfy their curiosity? Or was it not his primary concern that with the end of all things his days and the days of the congregation were numbered? But this did actually pertain to the apostle and his congregation. This continually repeats itself in such a generation, and each generation, and the next thing repeats itself also, because every person must die and thereupon come to judgment. See, Kierkegaard was a Christian, a real Christian, conscious of the judgment. These are called in Maltese in novissimi. Mewt, Judicium, Infern, jew Ġenna. And this springs up in my mind something quite different. Lutheranism, Kierkegaard was a philosopher of the 19th century. This book was written somewhere on the date 1843, and it had been 300 years since the Reformation started in Germany with the prominent figure Martin Luther, who then eventually spread out to Denmark and to other places. It was a very bad, sad thing for the church, this Reformation. It wasn't something happy, because the church lost some of its members. I mean, some of its members rebelled against the church and the authority, and they lost the sacrament of the Eucharist and the sacrament of reconciliation. These doesn't exist in the Lutheran Church. But yet again, look at him, how conscious he is. He has the Bible, and he talks about Jesus. He mentions Jesus in his writings. I've met him many times where he just goes directly to Jesus and refers to him like he knows he's Jesus. He knows who Jesus is. Who know the way, the truth, and the life, the Son of God. The way, the truth. This is Jesus. And for Kierkegaard, this is who Jesus is, undoubtedly. That's why he's undoubtedly a Christian. So, he was a Lutheran. That's what I wanted to point out. 19th century. Judgment, yes. We were in the judgment. It's 9:30 almost, yes. And I will have to leave in 15 minutes because I will have to go to church today at 10 o'clock. Today is a public holiday, 8th of December. So 15 more minutes and I'll stop for today. It's 15 minutes past, so 15 plus 15, 30 minutes video. But armor is also needed for the day of judgment. It is this and its perfection that the apostle describes. The armor is love. It is the only thing that will not be abolished. The only thing that remains with a person in life and remains with him in death, and that will be victorious in the judgment. Love is not like a deceitful friend who first invigilates a person and then remains with him in order to mock. No, love remains with a person. Okay, this is very interesting. You have friends, once they're friends, they are like, hey, hello, how are you? Yeah. The next week you're like, hey, you told me you did that, and they will attack you with what you said to them. This is a deceitful friend. That's not love. See? That's not love. Love never stops, says St. Paul in one of his epistles. No, love remains with a person, and when everything becomes confused for him, when his thoughts rise up accusingly, when anxieties condemningly rear their heads, then love intimidates them and says to him, just have patience. I will remain with you and witness with you, and my witness will overcome the confusion. Indeed, even if love has led to a person astray, even it cannot acquit him later, it will nevertheless say, would I abandon you in the hour of need? Even if you are abandoned by everything, even if you are abandoned by yourself, I am still with you. I who led you astray, but who also have discomfort for you, that is was I who did it. What if this were not so? What power is able to bring a person to risk the error in this way as love does? How horrible then, if it did not know so know how to interpret itself to itself, make itself understandable to the single individual, even if not another soul understood it. Let us then consider the apostolic words more closely. The apostle speaks to imperfect beings. How could one who is perfect have a multitude of sins that would need to be hidden? But the imperfect, the broken-hearted, them he also comforts. with the thought that love will hide a multitude of sins. We shall not light-mindedly tamper with the apostolic words. We shall not sagaciously deceive ourselves and cheat the words by thinking that the person who has love is perfect. These words do not apply to the person who does not find within himself a multitude of sins that need to be hidden, but they are of no use to the person who refuses their comfort, because the comfort is precisely this, that love is able to live in the same heart in which there is a multitude of sins, and that this love has the power to hide the multitude. Therefore, we shall now look for the comfort of it in the Apostles' words by considering how love will hide a multitude of sins. He's going to consider something important. But how is this possible? Love does indeed discover precisely in a person himself a multitude of sins. Has not many a person in this world gone on living lightly and carefully on the happy mentality of youth, without being arrogant about his own perfection, but also without feeling humbled or halted by an oppressive conscience, until love gripped him, and the past no longer pleased him, because love, in so many ways, had discovered imperfection and weakness. This is extremely brings about a very important point of mine. My past is horrible, okay? 2019, I was living an unchristian life, a pagan life. I was went to the extreme of nihilism, thinking that nothing exists. There's not just nothing, life is nothing. Everything will just disintegrate into nothingness. It was a very, very bad period of life. And it took me so long to get out of that, little by little, until love gripped me, and the past no longer pleased me, because love, in so many ways, had discovered imperfection and weakness. Did things go better for the sensible person? Let's continue. He frowned on the light-mindedness of youth. He kept watch on himself. He strove to rid himself of his faults, but in this striving he also gained the self-satisfaction that did not fear the test of the understanding, the accepted honor from people, that challenged the world to a struggle, then took aim at him, and see, he who has carried his head high, he who had mulched people by his glance, he now dropped his eyes. See? I went to confession. Suddenly, I dropped my in shame. I was like this, and then, because I realized my own sin. That was my story. Yeah, because he had discovered a multitude of sins. Like the story where Jesus was there eating, and Mary came and put some perfume, expensive perfume, and with her hair she shot toweled them out with a towel, she used her hair like a towel. See, because she had multitude of sins. She, through Jesus, discovered her own multitude of sins, and she was so grateful, so ashamed, so grateful and ashamed that she did this thing which is a bit strange, strange to her when at your feet with her hair wiping the perfumes. Strange. And Jesus did not admonish her, because he said she had a multitude of sins, and the multitude of sins have been forgiven. See? Not just one sin. You have to discover your own multitude of sins and be grateful like her, if God wants, through grace. and your multitude of sins will be forgiven, like mine. My multitude of sins, not once, not twice, as long as it takes. Confession, reconciliation is not a sacrament that is given by the church just once, like baptism, but it's like the Eucharist, like the Eucharist. Until love gripped him. Actually, let's stop here for today. 25 minutes, a good time to stop this, and I will just do. Oh, no need for bookmarks. If God wants, I'm busy at work, so I don't know if this podcast will. It's not a podcast actually. It's a reading of Kierkegaard. I don't know if it will continue.